The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton as Marines gathered around the shooting range for their monthly marksmanship competition. The air buzzed with competitive energy and the familiar sounds of military life. Among the perfectly pressed uniforms and polished boots, one figure stood out like a sore thumb. Marcus Thompson shuffled into the registration area, wearing faded jeans and a torn jacket that had seen better days. His gray beard was unkempt, and his weathered hands clutched a battered orange rifle case that looked like it had been salvaged from a garage sale. The bright orange plastic seemed to glow under the California sun, drawing stares and whispers from every direction. "Look what the cat dragged in," muttered Sergeant Rodriguez, nudging his buddy with his elbow. "Did someone let a homeless guy wander onto base?" The comment sparked a ripple of laughter among the younger Marines who were busy, setting up their expensive military-grade equipment. Marcus had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a Marine sniper before losing everything to PTSD and a series of unfortunate events that left him living in his car. The Department of Veterans Affairs had been slow to process his disability claims, and his savings had evaporated faster than morning dew. But today was different. Today, he had scraped together enough money to enter this civilian shooting competition that was open to former military personnel. The registration officer, a young corporal named Jenkins, looked Marcus up and down with barely concealed disgust. "Sir, this is a precision shooting competition. Are you sure you're in the right place?" His tone suggested that Marcus should probably be asking for directions to the nearest soup kitchen instead. Marcus quietly handed over his entry fee and crumpled bills and his military identification card. The corporal's expression changed slightly when he saw the sniper qualification badges and combat decorations listed on Marcus's service record, but he quickly returned to his dismissive attitude. "Well, I guess your money's as good as anyone else's," Jenkins said, processing the paperwork with obvious reluctance. "But I have to warn you, these guys are serious competitors with professional equipment. This isn't some weekend warrior event." As Marcus made his way to the equipment check area, conversation stopped and heads turned. The orange rifle case became a beacon that drew every eye on the range. Some Marines pointed openly, while others tried to be more subtle with their staring. The whispers followed him like a shadow. "Is that thing even real?" asked Private Martinez, squinting at the orange case. "It looks like a toy gun from a discount store." "Maybe he's here to entertain the kids," joked another Marine, causing a fresh wave of laughter to sweep through the group. "I didn't know they were hiring clowns for the competition." Marcus had heard it all before. The streets had taught him to ignore the cruel comments and judgmental stares. But something deep inside him stirred with each mocking laugh. These were his brothers in arms, fellow Marines who should understand the bond of service. Instead, they saw only his current circumstances, not the warrior he had once been. The range officer, Staff Sergeant Williams, approached Marcus with a clipboard and a skeptical expression. "Name and equipment for inspection," he said in a clipped, professional tone that barely masked his doubts about this unusual competitor. "Marcus Thompson, former Staff Sergeant, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines," Marcus replied quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years of hardship, but also an unmistakable thread of pride. "Sniper qualified. 3 combat tours." Williams raised an eyebrow but said nothing as Marcus opened the orange case. Inside, nestled in foam that had been carefully cut to fit, lay a rifle that defied all expectations. It was clearly military surplus, but it had been maintained with the kind of care that only a true marksman would understand. Every surface gleamed despite its age, and the scope, though older model, was perfectly aligned and spotlessly clean. "Interesting choice in carrying case," Williams commented dryly, making a note on his clipboard. "Most guys go for black or military green." "It was what I could afford," Marcus replied simply, running his weathered fingers along the rifle's stock with the reverence of someone touching a religious artifact. "But she shoots true. That's all that matters." The equipment passed inspection, but the damage to Marcus's reputation was already done. Word spread quickly through the group that the homeless guy with the orange case actually had a real rifle and legitimate military credentials, but instead of gaining respect, this information only seemed to fuel more creative insults. "Great, so we've got a washed-up veteran with delusions of grandeur," muttered Corporal Davis to his shooting partner. "This should be entertaining. I give him 1 round before he realizes he's embarrassing himself." As Marcus found a quiet corner to prepare his equipment, he could feel the weight of dozens of judgmental stares. Some Marines had already started placing informal bets on how badly he would perform. The consensus seemed to be that he would be lucky to hit the target at all, let alone compete with the skilled marksmen who regularly dominated these events. But Marcus had faced worse odds before. In the mountains of Afghanistan, he had made shots that others called impossible. He had saved lives and completed missions that existed only in classified files. Today, on this familiar California range, he would remind these young Marines what true marksmanship looked like. The orange case sat empty beside him, its bright color no longer seeming quite so ridiculous. Instead, it began to look like a challenge, a statement that sometimes the most unexpected packages contain the greatest surprises. Marcus methodically checked his rifle one more time, his movements precise and practiced despite the tremor in his hands that came from too many cold nights and not enough food. The competition was about to begin, and Marcus Thompson was ready to show everyone that you should never judge a warrior by his circumstances. Staff Sergeant Williams called the competitors to attention as the morning competition officially began. 24 Marines and former Marines lined up at the 500-meter firing line, their expensive rifles gleaming in the sunlight. Marcus took his position at lane 15, right in the middle of the pack, where his orange case stood out like a traffic cone among the sleek black equipment bags. "Gentlemen, welcome to Camp Pendleton's monthly precision shooting competition," Williams announced through his megaphone. "Today's course will test your skills at multiple distances, starting at 500 meters and working our way out to 2,000 meters. Each shooter gets 3 rounds per distance. Highest combined score wins." The Marines around Marcus began their pre-shooting routines with the confidence of seasoned competitors. They adjusted expensive bipods, checked wind meters, and made minute adjustments to their high-end optics. Their gear represented thousands of dollars in precision equipment, the kind that active-duty Marines could only dream of owning personally. Marcus simply laid prone behind his rifle, checking his scope one final time. His equipment was old but functional, maintained with the kind of care that came from understanding that your life might depend on your weapon's reliability. He had no fancy wind meter, but his eyes read the grass movement and flag positions with the instinct of someone who had learned to shoot in places where missing meant death. "First distance is 500 meters, Williams called out. "Load and make ready." The sound of bolts cycling echoed down the firing line as 24 shooters prepared for the opening shots. Marcus worked his bolt with smooth, practiced movements that spoke of thousands of rounds fired in training and combat. Beside him, Sergeant Rodriguez was making final adjustments to his scope, muttering about wind conditions and atmospheric pressure. "I bet the homeless guy doesn't even know what MOA means," Rodriguez whispered to his shooting partner, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "This is going to be painful to watch." Marcus ignored the comment and focused on his breathing. In through the nose, hold, out through the mouth. His heart rate slowed, and the familiar calm of the marksman's trance settled over him. The noise of the range faded to background static as his world narrowed to the target 500 meters downrange. "Shooters ready," Williams called. "Send it." The first volley erupted in a symphony of rifle fire that echoed across the range. 24 muzzle flashes lit up the firing line as precision bullets streaked toward their targets. Through his spotting scope, Williams watched the impacts appear on the target faces like tiny flowers blooming in the distance. Most shooters grouped their 3 shots within the 9 and 10 rings, exactly what Williams expected from experienced Marine marksmen. A few managed perfect scores, their bullets clustered tightly in the center of the target. But lane 15 caught his attention for a different reason entirely. Marcus's 3 shots had punched through the target in a group so tight that Williams had to look twice to confirm there were actually 3 holes. The bullets had struck within a space smaller than a quarter, dead center in the 10 ring. It was the kind of shooting that separated true marksmen from mere competitors. "Holy shit," breathed Private Martinez, who had been watching through his own spotting scope. "Did you guys see lane 15? The homeless dude just shot a group I couldn't make with a machine rest." Word began to spread down the firing line as spotters confirmed the impossible accuracy of Marcus's shooting. The Marines who had been joking about his appearance suddenly found themselves checking and double-checking their own targets, wondering if they had somehow misread the results. Rodriguez lowered his binoculars with a confused expression. "That has to be a fluke," he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "There's no way someone shooting surplus equipment can outshoot guys with custom rifles worth more than most people's cars." Williams marked the scores on his clipboard, noting that Marcus had achieved a perfect score with a group size that would have been impressive at half the distance. Around him, other shooters were beginning to take notice of the quiet veteran who had appeared from nowhere to challenge their assumptions about equipment and ability. "Moving to 800 meters, Williams announced. "Adjust your positions accordingly." The second distance brought new challenges as wind conditions became more critical and the margin for error decreased significantly. Several competitors struggled with the longer range, their groups opening up as small mistakes in reading conditions became magnified over the increased distance. Marcus made minimal adjustments to his scope, trusting in his understanding of ballistics over expensive gadgets. He had learned to shoot on ranges where laser rangefinders and ballistic computers were luxuries that most soldiers couldn't afford. Instead, he relied on fundamentals drilled into him through years of training and refined by the harsh teacher of combat experience. His second group at 800 meters was nearly as impressive as his first, with 3 shots clustered in the center of the target. The murmurs around him grew louder as other competitors realized they were witnessing something special. This wasn't lucky shooting. This was the kind of consistent accuracy that only came from exceptional skill and countless hours of practice. "What's his background?" Corporal Davis asked Williams during a brief pause in the competition. Williams consulted his registration sheet. "Former Staff Sergeant Sniper qualified, 3 combat tours in Afghanistan. Looks like he earned his expert badges the hard way." The information spread quickly through the group and the mocking comments began to fade. These Marines understood combat experience, and they knew that someone who had survived 3 tours as a sniper was not someone to underestimate, regardless of his current circumstances. As they prepared for the 200-meter distance, Marcus could feel the shift in atmosphere around him. The cruel jokes had stopped, replaced by a grudging curiosity about this mysterious competitor who was making their expensive equipment look inadequate. His orange case no longer seemed like a symbol of poverty. It was beginning to look like a warrior's battle flag, but Marcus knew the real test was still ahead. The longer distances would separate the truly skilled from the merely competent, and he was quietly confident that his years of hard-won experience would serve him well in the challenges to come. The 200-meter line represented a significant step up in difficulty. At this distance, even minor environmental factors could send bullets wildly off target. The desert wind had picked up slightly, and atmospheric conditions were becoming more challenging as the day progressed. Several competitors were already showing signs of frustration as their scores began to drop. Marcus studied the mirage dancing above the target through his scope, reading the subtle heat waves that revealed wind patterns invisible to less experienced eyes. In Afghanistan, he had learned to read these signs not from textbooks but from necessity. Missing a shot in combat meant more than losing points. It meant potentially losing lives. "At this distance, equipment really starts to matter," commented Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell, who was serving as the lead instructor for the event. "You can't compensate for inferior optics and cheap ammunition with just skill alone." His words carried across the firing line, and several Marines nodded in agreement, while glancing meaningfully toward Marcus's position. The assumption was clear. Whatever lucky streak the homeless veteran had enjoyed at shorter distances would end here, where expensive gear provided undeniable advantages. Marcus chambered his first round and settled into his shooting position. His rifle might be older, but it had been carefully maintained and zeroed with painstaking precision. More importantly, he understood its capabilities and limitations better than these competitors understood their high-tech equipment. The wind was quartering from left to right at approximately 8 miles per hour, with gusts reaching 12. Marcus made his calculations based on experience rather than digital readouts, trusting in knowledge earned through thousands of rounds fired in similar conditions. He adjusted his aim point and controlled his breathing, waiting for the brief lull between gusts. The shot broke cleanly, and through his scope, Marcus watched the bullet's vapor trail arc toward the distant target. Even before the spotters could confirm impact, he knew it was a good hit. The rifle's recoil felt familiar and comfortable, like shaking hands with an old friend. "Hit center mass," called the spotter for lane 15, dead center 10 ring. Around him, other shooters were struggling with the increased distance and challenging conditions. Groups that had been tight at shorter ranges began to spread out as small errors in wind reading and range estimation became magnified. Equipment that had seemed impressive at 500 meters was revealing its limitations as the challenge increased. Marcus's second and third shots followed with mechanical precision, each bullet finding its mark with the kind of consistency that made experienced shooters shake their heads in disbelief. His three-shot group at 200 meters measured smaller than most competitors had achieved at 800 meters. "This is getting ridiculous," muttered Rodriguez, who had managed only 2 hits out of 3 at the challenging distance. "Either that guy is the luckiest shooter alive or we're all watching something special." Williams was beginning to suspect it was the latter. As someone who had spent 20 years in the Marines and had seen countless competitions, he recognized true marksmanship when he witnessed it. Marcus wasn't just hitting targets. He was demonstrating the kind of precision that separated ordinary shooters from elite snipers. The whispers around the firing line had evolved from mockery to grudging respect, and now they were approaching something closer to awe. Young Marines who had been supremely confident in their abilities were beginning to question everything they thought they knew about shooting. "Moving to 1,600 meters," Williams announced. "This is where we separate the men from the boys." At 1,600 meters, the target appeared impossibly small through even the best optics. Wind drift became a major factor, and bullet drop required precise calculations that tested every aspect of a shooter's knowledge and skill. This was the distance where many competitions were won or lost, where small advantages in equipment and technique became decisive factors. Several competitors chose to withdraw from the longer distances, recognizing that their skills and equipment weren't adequate for the extreme ranges. Those who remained represented the best marksmen in the group, and they watched Marcus with growing curiosity and concern. "At this distance, you need to understand external ballistics, not just point and shoot," explained Sergeant Rodriguez to a younger Marine who was struggling with the calculations. "Bullet drop alone is over 20 feet. If you don't account for every variable, you might as well be shooting blindfolded." Marcus made his adjustments with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced similar challenges countless times before. His calculations were based on hard-won experience rather than computer programs or smartphone apps. In places like the Hindu Kush Mountains, he had made shots at distances that most shooters considered impossible, often without the luxury of perfect conditions or unlimited time. His first shot at 1,600 meters struck the target with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. The spotter confirmed another center hit, and a hush fell over the group of observers who had gathered to watch this unlikely competitor continue his remarkable performance. "Who is this guy?" whispered Corporal Davis to his shooting partner. "He's making shots that would challenge Olympic-level competitors, and he's doing it with equipment that looks like it came from a surplus store." The second and third shots followed with the same deadly precision, creating another impossibly tight group that left spectators struggling to understand what they were witnessing. Marcus's performance was defying every assumption about the relationship between equipment quality and shooting accuracy. Williams found himself paying less attention to the other competitors and focusing entirely on Lane 15. In his 2 decades of military service, he had encountered perhaps a handful of shooters capable of this level of consistent accuracy under challenging conditions. Most of them had been legendary figures in the sniper community, men whose names were spoken with reverence in certain circles. As the competitors prepared for the final 2 distances, the atmosphere on the range had completely transformed. The homeless veteran with the orange rifle case was no longer a source of amusement. He had become the focus of intense curiosity and growing respect. The mocking comments had been replaced by serious discussions about technique and the role of experience versus equipment in precision shooting. But Marcus remained focused on the task ahead, knowing that the most challenging distances were yet to come. As the competition moved to the 2,000-meter line, only 8 shooters remained. The others had either been eliminated by poor scores or had voluntarily withdrawn, recognizing that their skills weren't adequate for extreme long-range shooting. The survivors represented the best marksmen in the group, and they watched Marcus with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. Staff Sergeant Williams took advantage of the break to pull Marcus aside for a quiet conversation. Something about this homeless veteran's performance was bothering him, not because it was poor, but because it was too good. The level of skill Marcus was demonstrating wasn't something you acquired from weekend shooting or casual practice. "Thompson, can I have a word?" Williams asked, leading Marcus away from the other competitors. Marcus nodded and followed, his weathered hands still steady despite the stress of performing under intense scrutiny. He knew what was coming. Eventually, someone always asked the questions that he preferred not to answer. "Your shooting today has been exceptional," Williams began diplomatically. "In fact, it's been more than exceptional. I've been running these competitions for 5 years, and I've never seen anyone consistently shoot groups that tight at these distances. Your background says sniper qualified, but that doesn't tell the whole story, does it?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on the distant mountains that bordered the range. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of memories he rarely shared. "I was more than just sniper qualified," he said simply. "I was part of a special unit that didn't officially exist. We operated in places that don't appear on any map, taking shots that the regular military couldn't make. My longest confirmed kill was 3,847 meters in the mountains of Afghanistan." Williams felt his breath catch. That distance was approaching world record territory, the kind of shot that only a handful of snipers in history had ever achieved. "Jesus Christ, Thompson. What the hell are you doing homeless and entering local shooting competitions?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a spent cartridge. Marcus's story began to unfold slowly, each detail revealing the tragic arc that had brought him from elite warrior to forgotten veteran. "After my third tour, I came back different," Marcus explained. "The things we did, the places we went, they weren't supposed to exist. When I tried to get help for PTSD, the VA couldn't find records of half my service. The operations were classified at levels that made getting benefits nearly impossible." Williams listened with growing understanding and anger. He had heard similar stories before. Warriors who had served their country in shadows so deep that even their sacrifice was classified. When they returned home broken, the same secrecy that had protected national security became a barrier to receiving help. "I lost my house, my family, everything," Marcus continued. "My wife couldn't handle the nightmares and the drinking. My kids stopped talking to me when I couldn't explain why Daddy was different. The VA kept promising help was coming, but the paperwork disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. But you kept shooting," Williams observed. "It was the only thing that made sense anymore," Marcus replied. "On the range, everything was simple. Wind, distance, target. Variables you could calculate and control. It was the only place where the skills that made me useful in the war still mattered." Williams looked back toward the firing line, where the remaining competitors were preparing for the 2,000-meter challenge. "Why here? Why today?" Marcus's expression grew determined. "Because I needed to remember who I was before the world forgot. These Marines, they see a homeless bum with a cheap rifle case. They don't see the warrior I used to be. Today I wanted to show them that circumstances don't define capability." The conversation was interrupted by calls for shooters to return to the line. Williams placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, a gesture of respect between warriors. "Show them," he said simply. As Marcus returned to his position, word of Williams's conversation had somehow spread among the competitors. The mocking attitude had completely evaporated, replaced by something approaching reverence. These Marines understood what it meant to serve in classified operations, and they recognized the tragedy of a hero forgotten by the system he had served. At 2,000 meters, the target was barely visible even through high-powered optics. Environmental factors became critical, and even the slightest error in calculation could send bullets feet off target. This was the distance where equipment quality truly mattered, where cheap scopes and inferior ammunition revealed their limitations. Marcus chambered around and settled into his final firing position. The wind had shifted since the last distance, and mirage patterns indicated changing atmospheric conditions. He made his calculations with the calm precision of someone who had performed these same mental gymnastics under life-and-death pressure. The other competitors watched in silence as Marcus prepared to shoot. They had witnessed his impossible accuracy at shorter distances, but 2,000 meters was different. At this range, even Olympic-level shooters struggled to maintain precision with the best equipment available. Marcus's first shot broke cleanly, and everyone on the line followed the bullet's flight through their spotting scopes. The impact appeared dead center on the target, a shot that drew involuntary gasps from experienced marksmen who understood the difficulty of what they had just witnessed. "Perfect hit," called the spotter, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet range. The second shot followed with the same mechanical precision, and then the third. When the final impact was confirmed, Marcus had achieved something that bordered on the impossible. A perfect score at 2,000 meters with equipment that most competitors would have considered inadequate for half that distance. As the scores were tallied, it became clear that Marcus had not simply won the competition, he had dominated it so completely that his performance would become the stuff of range legend. His groups at every distance had been smaller than anything the other competitors could achieve with their expensive equipment. But more importantly, Marcus Thompson had reminded everyone present that the warrior spirit cannot be measured by circumstances or judged by appearances. Sometimes the most powerful weapons come in the most unexpected packages. The official competition had ended, but nobody was moving to leave. Marcus's performance had created a buzz of excitement and disbelief that rippled through the group of Marines like electricity. Conversations erupted everywhere as shooters compared notes and tried to understand what they had just witnessed. Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell approached Williams with a thoughtful expression. As the senior instructor, he had seen his share of exceptional marksmen, but Marcus's demonstration had left him questioning everything he thought he knew about the relationship between equipment and skill. "Williams, I've been thinking," Mitchell said quietly. "What we just saw was extraordinary, but I'm wondering if Thompson was holding back. A shooter with his background trained for operations that officially don't exist probably has capabilities we haven't even seen yet." Williams nodded, having similar thoughts. "What are you suggesting?" "The auxiliary range has targets set up at distances beyond what we use today," Mitchell replied. "I'm curious to see just how far Thompson's skills extend. With the right conditions and unlimited time, what could he actually accomplish?" The suggestion spread quickly through the group, and soon several Marines were approaching Marcus with barely contained excitement. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been among the most vocal critics earlier in the day, now found himself in the position of making a request. "Thompson, sir," Rodriguez began, his tone completely changed from the morning's dismissive attitude.
"Some of us were wondering if you'd be willing to try some longer shots."
"The range has targets set up at distances that most of us have never even attempted." Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him. These were the same Marines who had mocked his appearance and equipment just hours earlier. Now they were looking at him with the kind of respect usually reserved for legendary figures in the military community. "What distances are we talking about?" Marcus asked. "The auxiliary range has steel targets at 2,500, 3,000, and 3,500 meters, Mitchell explained. There's even a 4,100-meter target that was set up for a special demonstration last year. Most shooters consider anything beyond 3,000 meters to be more luck than skill." The mention of 4,100 meters caused a stir among the group. That distance approached the realm of world records, the kind of shot that existed more in legend than reality. For most shooters, it represented an impossible challenge that was beyond the limits of both equipment and human capability. Marcus considered the request carefully. The original competition had been about proving a point, showing these Marines that appearances could be deceiving. But this new challenge was different. This was an opportunity to demonstrate the full extent of skills that had been honed in the world's most dangerous places. "The conditions will need to be perfect," Marcus said finally. "At those distances, even small environmental changes can make shots impossible." Williams checked his weather instruments. "Wind is steady at 5 miles per hour. Temperature is stable and atmospheric pressure is ideal. We might not get better conditions for extreme long-range shooting." The group moved to the auxiliary range, where steel targets had been positioned at distances that challenged the limits of both optics and ballistics. At 2,500 meters, the target was barely visible even through high-powered spotting scopes. Beyond 3,000 meters, it became a theoretical point that existed more in calculation than visual reality. Marcus set up his rifle at the 2,500-meter line, taking extra time to ensure perfect positioning and stability. At these distances, even tiny movements could send bullets wildly off target. He had entered a realm where physics and human skill intersected at the very limits of possibility. The first shot at 2,500 meters struck the steel target with a clear ring that echoed across the range. The group of observers erupted in cheers and applause, recognizing the exceptional difficulty of what they had just witnessed. "That's a shot most of us couldn't make with perfect conditions and unlimited attempts," admitted Corporal Davis. His earlier skepticism completely replaced by admiration. Marcus moved to the 3,000-meter line, where the challenge became exponentially more difficult. Bullet drop at this distance exceeded 40 feet, and wind drift could push projectiles several feet off target. The calculations required were complex enough to challenge computers, yet Marcus performed them with the quiet confidence of extensive experience. His shot at 3,000 meters also found its mark, producing another metallic ring that seemed impossibly distant. The Marines watching through spotting scopes could barely see the impact, but the unmistakable sound confirmed another successful hit. "This is getting into world record territory," Williams said, consulting his range book. "Very few shooters in history have made confirmed hits at these distances." The 3,500-meter target represented a quantum leap in difficulty. At this distance, atmospheric conditions, Earth's rotation, and even altitude became significant factors in bullet trajectory. Marcus made minute adjustments to his scope, compensating for variables that most shooters never considered. The shot seemed to hang in the air forever before the distant ring confirmed another impossible hit. The group of Marines stood in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. This homeless veteran with his orange rifle case had just demonstrated shooting skills that bordered on superhuman. But everyone's attention was now focused on the final target, positioned at 4,100 meters. At this distance, the challenge transcended normal shooting and entered the realm of engineering and physics. Success would require perfect conditions, flawless execution, and more than a little luck. Marcus studied the distant target through his scope, making calculations that drew upon every aspect of his training and experience. At 4,100 meters, he would be attempting a shot that pushed the absolute limits of what was physically possible with his equipment. The Marines gathered around him fell silent, understanding that they were about to witness either the greatest shooting demonstration of their lives or a humbling reminder of the limits of human capability. The 4,100-meter target sat like a distant mirage on the far ridge of the range, barely visible even through the most powerful spotting scopes available. At this distance, the steel plate appeared as nothing more than a tiny speck against the desert landscape, a challenge that pushed beyond the boundaries of conventional marksmanship into territory that few shooters had ever explored. Marcus spent nearly 20 minutes studying the conditions and making his calculations. At 4,100 meters, every environmental factor became critically important. Wind speed and direction would change multiple times along the bullet's flight path. Atmospheric pressure, temperature gradients, and even the curvature of the Earth would influence the projectile's trajectory. The gathered Marines watched in respectful silence as Marcus worked through the complex ballistics problem. Many of them had never even considered the variables that became relevant at such extreme distances. Bullet drop alone would exceed 90 feet, requiring Marcus to aim at a point high above the target that existed only in his mental calculations. At this distance, "You're not really aiming at the target anymore," Marcus explained to the fascinated observers. "You're aiming at where physics tells you the target will intersect with your bullet's trajectory. It becomes more mathematics than marksmanship." Staff Sergeant Williams monitored the environmental conditions with growing concern. Wind speed was increasing slightly, and he could see heat mirage beginning to form as the afternoon sun warmed the desert floor. The perfect conditions they had enjoyed earlier were starting to deteriorate. "Thompson, the window for this shot is closing," Williams warned. "Winds picking up, and atmospheric conditions are becoming less stable." Marcus nodded, understanding that opportunities for shots at this distance were rare and fleeting. In Afghanistan, he had learned to recognize when conditions aligned perfectly for extreme long-range engagements. Such moments were precious and couldn't be wasted. He settled into his final firing position, taking extra care to ensure perfect stability and comfort. At 4,000 meters, even the slightest movement or tension could send the bullet drastically off course. His breathing slowed to the deep, controlled rhythm that all precision shooters learned, but which became critically important at these distances. Through his scope, Marcus could barely make out the target. It appeared as a small blur against the landscape, more suggestion than reality. He would need to trust his calculations completely, since visual confirmation of the aim point was nearly impossible at this range. The Marines around him had grown absolutely still, understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Several experienced shooters held their breath involuntarily, as if their own respiratory movements might somehow influence the shot that was about to be taken. Marcus made his final wind calculation, accounting for the varying conditions along the bullet's 4-second flight time. The projectile would rise nearly 100 feet above the line of sight before beginning its long descent toward the target. During that time, it would be subject to wind forces that could push it several feet in any direction. "Send it," Williams whispered, though Marcus was already beginning his final firing sequence. The shot broke with the same clean precision that had characterized all of Marcus's shooting that day. But at 1,400 meters, the usual immediate feedback was absent. The bullet would take over 4 seconds to reach the target, an eternity in shooting terms that left everyone uncertain about the result. Through their spotting scopes, the observers tracked the bullet's vapor trail as it arced impossibly high, before beginning its descent toward the distant ridge. The trajectory looked correct, but at such extreme range, even perfect calculations could be defeated by minor environmental changes. 4.5 seconds passed in complete silence. Then faintly but unmistakably, the metallic ring of bullet-striking steel echoed across the desert. The sound seemed to take forever to travel back to the firing line, but when it arrived, it triggered an explosion of cheers and applause from the gathered Marines. "Hit!" shouted the Marine operating the spotting scope focused on the distant target. "Dead center hit at 4,100 meters. The reaction from the group was unlike anything Williams had ever witnessed at a shooting competition. These were experienced Marines who understood the extraordinary difficulty of what they had just observed. Several shooters were shaking their heads in disbelief, while others demanded to look through the spotting scope to confirm the impossible hit. Marcus calmly worked the bolt of his rifle and engaged the safety, his movements as controlled and methodical as they had been throughout the day. To the amazed observers, he seemed almost casual about having just made one of the longest confirmed shots in shooting sports history. "How?" asked Sergeant Rodriguez, his voice filled with genuine awe. "How is that even possible with that equipment?" Marcus considered the question carefully before responding. "The rifle is more accurate than most people realize. It's not about having the most expensive equipment. It's about understanding your weapon's capabilities and having the knowledge to use them properly." Gunnery Sergeant Mitchell was consulting his range book and calculator, working through the ballistics of what they had just witnessed. "Thompson, do you realize what you just accomplished? That shot puts you in company with maybe a dozen shooters in history. At 4,100 meters, you've just set an unofficial record for this range." The significance of the achievement was beginning to sink in among the group. They had started the day mocking a homeless veteran with an orange rifle case. They were ending it having witnessed shooting that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. But perhaps more importantly, they had learned a lesson about judging others based on appearances and circumstances. The warrior spirit, they now understood, couldn't be measured by material possessions or current living situations. Sometimes the greatest capabilities came in the most unexpected packages. Marcus began to pack his equipment back into the bright orange case that had drawn so much ridicule earlier in the day. Now that same case seemed like a symbol of defiance against those who would judge capability by appearance. It had carried a rifle capable of impossible accuracy in the hands of a master marksman. As the Marines gathered around to congratulate him and ask questions about his techniques, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: the respect and brotherhood of fellow warriors who recognized his skills and honored his service. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, he felt like he belonged somewhere again. Word of Marcus's extraordinary shooting performance spread through Camp Pendleton like wildfire. By evening, Marines from across the base were seeking out details about the homeless veteran who had made impossible shots with surplus equipment. The story grew with each retelling, but the core facts remained undeniable. Someone had just demonstrated marksmanship skills that bordered on legendary. Staff Sergeant Williams spent the evening making phone calls to contacts throughout the military community. Marcus's performance had been so exceptional that Williams felt obligated to document it properly and ensure that the right people heard about what had happened. The shooting community was small and tightly connected, and news of record-setting performances traveled quickly through established networks. "Sir, you need to hear this," Williams said when he reached Colonel Patterson, the base commander. "We had a shooting competition today that ended with something I've never seen before. A homeless veteran just made confirmed hits out to 4,100 meters with equipment that most people would consider inadequate for half that distance." Colonel Patterson was initially skeptical, Claims of extreme long-range shooting were common in military circles, but confirmed hits at distances approaching world records required serious documentation and verification. However, Williams's reputation for accuracy and honesty made the report worthy of investigation. "Tell me about this veteran," Patterson requested. Williams consulted his notes. Marcus Thompson, former staff sergeant with 3 combat tours. His records indicate special operations experience, though the details are heavily classified. He's currently homeless and struggling with PTSD and VA benefits issues. The colonel's tone changed immediately. Like many senior officers, Patterson was acutely aware of the problems facing combat veterans who had served in classified operations. Their sacrifice often remained unrecognized because the very nature of their service was secret, making it difficult to receive appropriate care and benefits. "I want to meet this Marine," Patterson decided. "Set up an appointment for tomorrow morning." Meanwhile, Marcus had returned to his car in the parking lot where he lived, his orange rifle case carefully secured in the trunk. The day's events felt surreal, like a dream that might evaporate if he examined it too closely. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of purpose and accomplishment that reminded him of who he used to be. His phone, an old flip model that barely functioned, rang unexpectedly. Few people had his number, and calls usually meant problems with his VA benefits or legal issues related to his homelessness. "Mr. Thompson, this is Staff Sergeant Williams from today's competition. I hope you don't mind me calling." Marcus was surprised by the contact. Military personnel rarely followed up with competition participants, especially those who weren't active duty. "I've been making some calls about your performance today," Williams continued. "What you accomplished has attracted attention from some very senior people. Colonel Patterson would like to meet with you tomorrow morning if you're available." The meeting with Colonel Patterson took place in the base commander's office, a space that Marcus hadn't seen since his own days as an active-duty Marine. Patterson was a seasoned officer who had spent 30 years in the Marines and had developed a keen eye for evaluating personnel. "Sergeant Thompson, I've reviewed your service record," Patterson began. "What I can see of it anyway. Large portions are classified at levels that make them inaccessible, even to someone with my clearance. That tells me you were involved in operations that most people can't even imagine." Marcus nodded but said nothing. The details of his special operations service remained classified, and discussing them would violate oaths he had taken years earlier. "What I want to discuss is your current situation," Patterson continued. "Outstanding warriors shouldn't be living in their cars because of bureaucratic failures. The Marine Corps takes care of its own, and we've clearly failed in your case." The colonel outlined a plan that seemed too good to be true. The Marines needed experienced instructors for their sniper school, and Marcus's demonstrated skills made him an ideal candidate. The position would provide housing, medical benefits, and most importantly, official recognition of his service and capabilities. "The VA benefits issue will be resolved through proper channels," Patterson assured him. "You have allies now who understand your value and are willing to advocate for you. Your service record may be classified, but your current needs are not." Within 2 weeks, Marcus found himself back in Marine Corps facilities, but this time as a civilian instructor responsible for training the next generation of Marine snipers. His orange rifle case had been replaced with modern equipment, but he kept the original as a reminder of the day when everything changed. The young Marines in his classes approached their training with a new level of respect when they learned about their instructor's background. Stories of the 4,100-meter shot had become legend on the base, inspiring shooters to push beyond what they thought possible and reminding everyone that true capability couldn't be judged by appearances. Marcus's housing situation was resolved through a combination of VA benefits and his instructor salary. For the first time in years, he had a permanent address, regular meals, and access to the medical care he needed for his PTSD. But perhaps most importantly, he had regained his sense of purpose and belonging within the military community that understood his sacrifice. The orange rifle case sat in a place of honor in his new apartment, a symbol of the day when a group of Marines learned that the most powerful weapons often came in the most unexpected packages. It served as a daily reminder that circumstances don't define capability, and that sometimes the greatest victories come not from perfect equipment, but from the warrior spirit that refuses to surrender despite overwhelming odds. Marcus Thompson had proven that even when the world seems to have forgotten your value, there's always an opportunity to remind them who you really are. Sometimes it just takes one perfect shot to change everything.